Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a Native American soldier is granted permission to wear a traditional haircut and feathers. Hear about why he sought the exemption. And more from the annual C4ISRNet conference. Stay tuned for a conversation about the future of conflict in space. Also, the latest in our limited series on one of the most hazardous jobs in the Vietnam War, long-range reconnaissance patrol. Hear from veterans of these elite units about what it was like to fight in teams of 6. Plus, more of our reporting on the ground from the recent LANPAC conference. Hear what officials overseeing the Pacific Theater are focusing on. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. Army Major Patrick Sorensen is a Native American soldier with a proud history of engaging with his heritage. The 18-year service member recently received a religious exemption to wear long hair and eagle feathers, an achievement he announced in a set of striking visuals he posted on social media. We spoke to Sorensen on how and why he pursued an accommodation, and what he hopes could be accomplished with the exemption. Here's some of that conversation with reporter Jonathan Lehrfeld.
I am hoping that you can share a little bit more with us about your background, your service history, and also your tribal affiliation.
So I did bounce around a lot as a kid, but I grew up mostly in Northern California, around Humboldt County area. My mother, she is white. My father, he's Native American and German. And so he grew up on the reservation in Grand Ronde, Oregon. I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, which is our federally recognized tribe. And we're a confederated tribe, which means during the consolidation period that was happening around 1865, several tribes were brought together onto one reservation. So myself, by blood, I'm both Umpqua and Rogue River.
Can you share more for us about why it was important to you and your community and to your faith to request this religious accommodation and what that process was like?
I was taught that, our hair represents our spirit and our strength. And there's a lot of different beliefs across, North America on exactly, is it physically, holding power? Is it more symbolic in the religious sense of that growth or that power or that strength or that courage? Lots of different things, right? And so for me personally, I do believe in the importance of hair, to kind of follow my tribal tradition and our ways. Now, if a little bit gets cut off, do I feel like, something weird's going to happen? No, but it's really important culturally.
So the approval itself came through when exactly?
It was signed on the 20th of May. So I'm 2 days past my anniversary of getting the approval. How
did you feel when you first heard that it had been approved?
I was extremely excited. I was overjoyed. What really happened is my photos went viral. It wasn't on purpose. I originally posted it to Facebook, and it was actually Sergeant Dupree, who I previously mentioned, who said, "Hey, Pat, can you make this public so I can share it?" And I said, "Okay." And then it kind of took off from there. I am now up to 58 Native American soldiers who've reached out to me for support. And I'm not counting a handful of sailors and Air Force who also reached out.
Both in the Army and across the services, what can you share with us about the high propensity to serve among the American Indian Alaska Native community?
Yeah, so Native Americans, we serve at about a 5% higher rate than any other racial demographic. And the simple, explanation for that is we're a warrior culture, right? It's kind of like baked into our culture that we are warriors. And so we want to serve. Of course, we can be warriors in other ways, right? We can support our community. We can be leaders in the community and without, picking up weapons. But as far as, the military force is concerned, that is our modern equivalent to being warriors and being able to serve as warriors. There's a lot of mixed feelings about military service in the Native community. Like I said, we generally are a warrior culture, and a lot of us choose to serve. But some tribes and some communities are a little bit against service because one of the reasons might be because of like leaving, your tribe or leaving your family. For me personally, it was an opportunity to, up level my income based on what was probably expected from my family background, and kind of like be able to, buy a home and do some of these things that I think every American dreams about. But when it comes to making higher ranks and having a seat at the table for large decision-making discussions, I would love to see more Native Americans in positions like that.
And in a related story, an Army captain recently became the first to get a religious accommodation for her traditional hand tattoos. Captain Isis Sake earlier in 2024 gained an exemption to display her tatau, which are tattoos traditional to women from Samoa. Originally from Apia, Samoa, not to be confused with the nearby U.S. territory American Samoa, Sake moved to the United States with her family as a child. Following in the footsteps of her older sisters, she enlisted in the Army in 2008, quickly moving up the ranks before commissioning in June 2019. In 2017, Sake obtained the Samoan tatau for women, known as malu, on her legs, before adding the traditional tattoos to her hands in 2022. Tattoos have long held strong significance for troops, with liberal use of body art popular throughout their services. Each branch, however, maintains strict rules on which tattoos are within standards, allowing for individual expression while also aiming to ensure a professional uniform appearance. In a recent interview with Military Times, Sake said the tattoos signify both the trust a Samoan family places in a daughter and her commitment to keeping Samoan traditions alive.
The entire significance behind it is selfless service. I come from a family that, has been serving their community, since I was born, and even before me, like generations of, service. I mean, that's what my heritage, is all about. Not only is this a not only does this symbolize like your reverence to the culture, but it's an external extension to show, right, your commitment to your family, to service.
When we return, more from our new limited series on Vietnam, Shadows in the Jungle. Don't go away. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. The pain of losing a brother in arms in combat is a particular anguish known only to service members. For members of Vietnam's long-range reconnaissance patrols, that experience could be particularly haunting and acute. The LRPs, as they were known, worked in close-knit six-man teams behind enemy lines and had a culture and language all to themselves. In this installment of our limited series, Shadows in the Jungle, veterans of those long-range recon units talk about what it was like to lose a fellow soldier.
My only best friend from Vietnam was a crazy Texan. And he liked to walk out in a trail in front of VC and just stare at him before he shot him. And I kept telling him his name was Wild Bill Collins. Told him one of these days you're going to run into one that's not scared, and he's going to kill you. Nah, they're all scared. Well, one day he ran into one that put a round right in his forehead, and it took him 4 days to die. And broke my heart. And after that, all I wanted to do was kill. one of the guys that was monitoring the radio that night in the forward fire support base got the news that Collins had died. He came to tell me, and I told him, good. He said, good? I thought you and Collins were best friends. I said, we were, but he would not have wanted to be a veggie. So it's good that he's gone. And cried the rest of the night.
And you say you were on a bit of a path of vengeance after that.
I don't remember much of the missions after Collins died. I was just crazy.
The guy that was my team sergeant was killed, and I was laying next to him on a stretcher, and I kept talking to him. He was 29 years old, had 4 children, and he was dead, and it just, it's haunted me for 55 years, that you get that, I don't know, that survivor's guilt, I think is what they call it, but, how come he had to die? And I wasn't married at the time, so, it doesn't make any sense to you. But it's, and you can't, you can never get rid of that picture. You find them on the ground, they're bleeding all over themselves, you do the best you can to patch them, trying to get them out of there, and it was at night, and it took quite a while for the medevac to get in, to get everybody out. And I don't know to this day whether I didn't really find out till the next day that he didn't make it when the commanders came up in the hospital, but it still is, it's a trauma, and just a trauma, and it just never goes away, but
We lost a few men in our company. There were other companies that lost an entire team. We did lose a few. One of the best radio operators that I ever saw was a man called John Looney. And this man would be on the radio even in the middle of the most vicious firefight. And his voice was always calm, cool, collected. And at points when they would not believe that someone was in a firefight because he wasn't all that excited. He was very good at that job.
We gave up a life that was pretty secure and pretty safe. We left our families, and thought we were going to die at 20 years old. You don't think you're going to die, you spend all that time, and there's a lot of guys that did die. I lost one kid there. I had gotten there, Robert Lee Johnson. He got there about 4 weeks before I did, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks before I did. He's from Baltimore, Maryland, and young kid, 19. And he went out on a mission, and he had contact with the enemy, and he got killed. And his parents wrote us a letter. It just made you tear up because he was so proud to have gotten through the LERP training and so proud to be a LERP and to have that acronym to his name, and then he got killed.
See guys that might be 20 years old and they look like they're 50 because that's the effect of war it has on you. As far as the memories, I won't get into any of that, but it's it's difficult sometimes, when you've lost friends and comrades. It's sometimes a very difficult thing to keep.
And high school, you're supposed to be going to parties and chasing girls, and you didn't get to do that. And when you came back, you didn't really want to do it, So it changed you.
It makes you grow up really quick. War does that to you, I guarantee you,
My best friend, Frank Souza, Billy and I crawled over to him. He was laying on his back with his arms out like this, and he had a little hole right here when we pulled his shirt apart. Little hole, right in the center of his and we thought he's got a sucking chest wound, and we took a plastic battery case and put it over the top, and we're getting ready to tie it down. We couldn't get any suction. And we rolled him over, and he had a hole in his back that big around. You could see his shredded right lung. Well, you know, young men don't lose brothers well. What it amounts to. It's tough to go through that. You don't have time to analyze it. You just react.
Shadows in the Jungle will continue running on militarytimes.com throughout June. When we come back, our personal finance expert returns with tips on which questions you should talk about before you move in with someone. Welcome back. Let's say you're about to take the plunge and move in with someone. Do you know which questions you should ask to ensure financial compatibility? On this edition of Money Minute, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack outlines how to talk about finances before getting a place with a partner.
It's wedding season, and millions of couples are moving in together, combining their lives and their finances under one roof. Once you've made the decision to share your life and lifestyle with someone else, it helps to have a plan for how you're going to align your goals, financial and otherwise. Hopefully, you've already had the talk about debt and credit. You both need to know where you stand in order to form a plan that helps you cultivate a healthy financial profile. Figure out what each of you bring to the family budget. Then subtract your monthly expenses, housing, car payments, insurance, and personal loans. With what's left over, decide whether to tackle high-rate, high-debt balances or save money or both. Once you've got your budget handled, it's time to think about the future. Get professional help to pin down your combined short and long-term goals and how to get there. A good financial advisor can walk you through some of the more complex financial decisions, help with investments or retirement, and put you both on the path to success.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, fire up the Warthog and fly it toward militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to become the most informed paratrooper jumping out of the plane, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning to bring you the most recent headlines. Lastly, if social media is where you monitor open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And while it's still legal, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. When we return, more from our reporting on the ground with military officials in the Pacific. Hear about international efforts to strengthen the Western presence there. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. The Pacific is a region of escalating concern for military leaders, ranging from the Pentagon to the island nations of the region. With the U.S. focusing ever more on possible future conflict there, it's been working on shoring up ties with nations like the Philippines and other allied countries to improve interoperability. It's under those auspices that military leaders from a host of nations gathered at a recent conference in Hawaii, where Defense News' Jen Judson was on hand. Here's some of her conversations with officials at LANPAC 2024.
Well, thank you so much, General Hugwood, for joining us here at LANPAC. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Thanks, Jen. It's great to see you as well.
In the Pacific, as opposed to landlocked places in the United States.
Yeah.
You learned a lot at Talisman Sabre. That's what we talked about last time.
Right.
And so that was last year. Can you lay out some of the big lessons that you learned at Talisman Sabre and how you're going to take those and implement them as you're planning for the next round of Talisman Sabre in 2025?
The Talisman Sabre was a great exercise for us in that oftentimes sustainment as a warfighting function doesn't necessarily train itself. Yeah. It trains to support other units or activities, maneuver, fires, things of that nature that are going on. And the great thing that we learned as part of Talisman Sabre is the power of actually rehearsing sustainment And then we took that same idea and have been applying it to exercises since then.
Okay.
And I think that that'll just continue to crescendo up and continue to build. Ultimately, that we make Talisman Sabre 25, better, more inclusive, and then just continue that effort.
Can you talk about how the 8th TSC is participating in Bala-Katan? I did have a chance to see from afar the work that Army divers were doing to dredge a port area and work to improve that on one of the northern islands. But talk about some of the things that you were doing at Bala-Katan and why those things were important to both the Philippines but also for the U.S. Army, and when you talk about projection.
So most of the actions that we were doing, at least in the day-to-day exercise implementation, were tied to the engineer effort that you saw, to dredge, building a warehouse to support humanitarian assistance. We had the dogs out there doing some military police work with them and some EOD work that we were doing.
You're both in charge of multi-domain task forces. It's very hot right now. I've been writing about the MDTF since it was an experimental unit in 2018. A lot has happened. Now you are operational units. You are 2 of 3 dedicated to the Pacific. The third one is yet to stand up. But what are some of the things that you achieved during Bala-Katan and some of the other exercises this year as part of your MDTF?
First of all, Jen, thank you so much for hosting us, and thank you so much for visiting our soldiers forward in the Philippines. I know that was really exciting for them and their ability to showcase for you the things that they are doing for the Army right now. As we look at our fires platforms, we're doing, side by side with the Philippine Army Artillery Regiment, we are experimenting and really applying our readiness when it comes to HIMARS, when it comes to our mid-range capability, and we're doing that as we look at shared interest when it comes to the territorial defense of the Philippines. We have a protection, really our ADA, our air defense artillery. Soldiers are forward working with the Philippine Army counterparts and the Armed Forces of the Philippine counterparts doing subject matter expert exchanges. And then our support battalion that just stood up this past fall actually have multiple nodes throughout the Philippines.
What we've been able to focus on, much like General Harrington highlighted in terms of putting the people and the concept in place and then letting sort of the doctrine and how you integrate those systems will follow quickly. We've seen success in our ability to synchronize with the Joint Force. The fact that we're stationed here in Hawaii is not by accident. Within about a 15 minutes drive, I've got access to every single component command headquarters and the joint headquarters for which we work every single day. So our focus has been on how do we actually integrate our command and control, how do we fuse the intelligence picture, how do we interoperate at the operational level throughout the theater, and then through the pathways exercises we've been able to exercise it and then actually be able to start to deploy some of that capability forward.
What are some of the capabilities that you are experimenting with now, across various companies and battalions as part of this?
I'll give an example. General Harrington highlighted high altitude balloons. So we're working with those high altitude balloons, and not just the balloons themselves. They are the platform to do something with many different payloads. So we're also experimenting with the payloads, and then through the application of that, how do we actually now move the data across the vast expanses? So the backhaul of data is a whole nother area that we're experimenting.
Extension.
Yep, that's right.
And I always think it's interesting to look at as, we talked a little bit about space, we talked high altitude balloons, but we really look at a family of systems all the way from space, all the way down to that terrestrial layer. So you saw the K-1000 UAS being operated in the Philippines. That allows us in that air layer to, again, have optionality for the Joint Force Commander of payloads that we can employ. And then also at the terrestrial layer, we look at
electromagnetic spectrum,
those
capabilities.
And our ability to do that from terrestrial layer all the way up to space allows us to now get out at the range that we've never been able to get to before.
And that's all we have room for in this week's episode. We'll see you next time on Defense News Weekly.